Something is pulling it down. I'll take a look.
Johnny! Oh no! The water's put his flames out!
Hold on to my legs, Ben. I'm going after Johnny. He can never break into my inner sanctum. These walls are titanium reinforced steel. And with my time lock on... Come on, baby.
Welcome to Talking Comics. My name is Per.
Hi, I'm Paul.
Today we'll be talking about Fantastic Four #1, a classic comic. You like the Fantastic Four, don't you, Paul?
Yeah, see, like when I was a kid in the late 70s, my mom would take me to the grocery store, and comics were 35 cents, but eventually got up to a whopping 40 cents by the time John Byrne was the artist on the Fantastic Four. And that's what really drew me to the comic was his art. It just seemed to be better than everybody else's. And so periodically I'd buy comic books and Fantastic Four in particular, but really the game changer for me was in 1986. I happened to be skateboarding down the street and I stumbled upon a comic book store. I'd never even heard of such a thing. So I walked in and blew my mind. I saw FF number 20 on the wall. It looked old, you know, like the art, it didn't look anything like John Byrne as Jack Kirby. So it's very different looking, and I was blown away. And so from that moment on, I was really hooked.
Yeah, the childhood stuff that gets you into comics is pretty cool. So the Fantastic Four is from 1961, which is old school, but comics are even more old school than that. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of comics that led up to the Fantastic Four, Paul?
Yeah, sure. So in the late 30s, superheroes took off faster than a speeding bullet. During the war, kids loved reading about these superheroes punching Hitler right in the face. The GIs overseas, they loved reading them too. But once the war ended, the superhero would fall out of favor with the public. Horror was the next big genre in comics. These horror comics that would feature atrocious crimes, such as a man chopping off a woman's head with an axe, came to a screeching halt after Frederick Wortham's 1954 book, Seduction of the Innocent, had caught the attention of the U.S. Senate. That book turned comics into public enemy #1 as it brought to light that any kid with a dime could buy these comics that were very graphic in nature. The comic book industry switched from horror to monster and sci-fi stories that were more kid-friendly. The newly watered-down comic book industry almost went out of business due to poor sales. In 1956, DC hit pay dirt with the return of the superhero, and Marvel wanted to get in on the act too. So Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created FF #1 with the cover date of 1961.
So in 1961, John F. Kennedy announced that he wanted to go to the moon. The Cold War was in full swing, and this was affecting other stuff, including comic books. And so one of the major plot points of Fantastic Four #1 is that the characters get their powers from going in a spaceship and getting bombarded with cosmic rays. And it's just a great piece of Americana. Okay, Paul, let's talk about the cover here. It kind of looks like a superhero cover, but it kind of looks like a monster cover. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's right. And so, you know, before Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created FF #1, they were really doing a lot of monster covers, a lot of sci-fi. And really with FF #1, you can see that there's kind of a blend of that. You have these superpowered people who got bombarded by cosmic rays from shooting off into space, you know, very sci-fi, and now they're fighting a monster on the cover. So it's really this unique merge of both genres of pre-superhero Marvel into the actual superhero comic.
Yeah, and wasn't DC, that's the main competitor to Marvel, didn't they have a comic book called The Justice League of America that came out a couple years before and was selling well? And wasn't there something going on there?
Yeah. So apparently there was a golf game, is what I've heard before, where I think it's Carmine Infantino and the editor of Marvel. It wasn't Stan Lee. It was I can't think of his name right now. But they were playing golf, and apparently he found out. Oh, I'm sorry, Martin Goodman. Martin Goodman found out that the Justice League comic was selling really well, so he wanted to kind of jump all over it. But if you ask Stan Lee, it's not quite that story. Stan Lee actually kind of denies that Martin Goodman wanted him to do it. The way he reports it is that he was tired of doing those monster comics and the cowboy and the sci-fi. He was tired of it, and he wanted to quit. And his wife said, "Well, why don't you do something that you want to do?" And that's when he came up with the FF.
I think we all want to be credited with creating the Fantastic Four, don't we?
Yeah, and certainly Stan Lee did.
Okay, so the Justice League of America was somewhat of an inspiration, but also there was something called the Challengers that was an inspiration for the Fantastic Four. Can you tell me about that, Paul?
Well, yeah, so the Challengers were actually just a couple issues after the Flash. So in DC Showcase number 4, the Flash starts, and that really is the very, very beginning of the Silver Age. And just 2 issues later, you get the Challengers of the Unknown. And the Challengers of the Unknown, it was drawn by Jack Kirby as well. And it's really interesting because they had kind of they weren't superheroes by any means. They were adventurers, but not superheroes. They had no powers. But they did kind of have a uniform, so to speak. They had like matching purple jackets, which I think is really interesting because when you look at the FF blasting off into space, they're wearing purple astronaut suits.
Yeah, okay, we'll take a look at that, the interior of the comic, in a little bit. Here's the page showing how they're blasting off into space, and they get bombarded by cosmic rays, and you can see the purple outfits there that are reminiscent of Challengers of the Unknown. Okay, we're going to look a little bit at the first page here. It's kind of funny. Reed uses a flare gun to shoot the Fantastic Four in giant letters in the sky. It reminds me a lot of the bat signal. Okay, now we're going to look at the Fantastic Four, the 4 main characters. The first one we will look at is Sue Storm, the Invisible Woman. There's something called the Bechdel test, which is, it's a test for movies to see if they're, if they treat women correctly or whatever. And the test is, do you have 2 women talking to each other about something other than a man? And so a lot of these old 60s comics, are not going to pass that test with flying colors. But I would say right here, this page is pretty good. I mean, it's Sue. She's doing stuff on her own. She's with her friend. They don't actually talk to each other because she kind of pulls a fast one on her friend and turns invisible. But it's a good page. And then it kind of reminds me of this transition from monsters to comic books because she scares people, and one of the guys is like, "It must be a ghost."
Yeah, I love how she's at this, social event, and her friend is talking to her, and Sue just turns invisible and leaves. I mean, why on earth wouldn't she just say, "Oh, I have to go"? But no, she literally just turns invisible and disappears. Boop.
Okay, here's a page early on about the Thing. Why don't you tell us about that, Paul?
Yeah, so it's pretty great. So the Thing is, next up in the batting order to run back to headquarters, and instead of just walking through the door that he must have walked in through earlier, he decides to walk through a wall and then tear up the concrete and go in the sewer. And as you can see, he's popping up out of the ground, and a car is about ready to strike him.
Yeah, I mean, all of those things could be the Thing, who's kind of a proto-superhero, or they could just be the things that a monster does. So it's pretty monstrous.
He is very much so a monster.
Yeah. All right, the third member we have here is Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, named after a character from the 40s. He's a hot rodder. So he has a fast car, and he's at the mechanic, getting his car souped up. And when he notices the, in quotes, bat signal, he just flames on and shoots right through the top of his own car, melting it, which is pretty aggressive.
Yeah, I just couldn't he have like stepped out of the vehicle and then flamed on?
Okay, the fourth member is Reed Richards. He's the leader of the four. And the first panel here is pretty funny, I think, because after Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, flies through the roof of his own car, he gets chased by like the American military, and he accidentally like destroys a bunch of their jets. And so they fire atomic or nuclear missiles at him. And then all of a sudden, while the nuclear missile is following him, some arms like reach up into the sky, grab the missile, and throw it into the ocean. So I don't know how big New York is, but it sounds like those arms would be about a mile long. But anyways, those arms belong to Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, and he's based on Plastic Man from the 40s, a superhero character from the 40s.
Yeah, right. It's so crazy that that the U.S. military, the Air Force, would fire a nuclear missile in city limits.
I believe in 1961, that's just what you did.
I think it is what you did. Like, oh, there's a problem. Let's throw nukes on it.
And I forgot to mention, but Sue, the Invisible Woman, is based on The Invisible Man. That's an H.G. Wells book, I think, from the 1800s. So there's some old school roots there as well.
Yeah, you could really say that Stan Lee didn't invent the wheel here. He really took inspiration from a lot of different things.
It is funny because it's like they're so iconic, and they're kind of the first of a lot of things, but almost nothing in it is like the first of its kind. It's just they took a bunch of stuff that you'd heard of before and put it together for the first time.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the comic itself, but the Fantastic Four has had a lot of media and things happen since then. In particular, they've had 4 movies. Let's see, they had one in 1994 that was never released. They had one in 2005 with Chris Evans, and a sequel to that one in 2007. Those are probably considered the better ones. And then they had one in 2015, which I think was considered a flop. You see any of those movies, Paul?
Yeah, I've seen all of them. Certainly the last one was really bad, and the thing I really disliked about it was the way they did Doctor Doom. It was just terrible. The very first one, oddly enough, it's kind of good. Given the 80s technology that they had, they had the Thing in a suit, and Doctor Doom was actually pretty good. It kind of worked for having a shoestring budget. The ones in the middle, though, the ones with Chris Evans, he was definitely the bright star of the whole show. But overall, I kind of didn't love them the way I wish, I would have. I was really open for more.
I think everyone wants like a super great Marvel Cinematic Universe Fantastic Four movie. Would you like that?
Yeah, in fact, that kind of brings me to prices and what has happened with the price of FF #1.
Okay, let's talk about prices. What has happened to the price of it?
Well, when I was a kid in 1986, I bought a price guide, and that price guide showed that FF #1 in fine condition was $500. A lot of money in 1986. But wow, it's really gone up recently, and it had another incredible jump. So before Marvel announced that they were interested in buying Fox Studios, before that same comic was selling for $10,000, quite a bit more than $500. But once the rumor came out, that same comic book was going for $30,000 just overnight with the rumor.
Wow, it really jumped. Yeah, people are really want that movie to be made. Yeah, the good.
Yeah, They're certainly speculating on a movie. That's exactly right.
That is right. Okay. Well, that's Fantastic Four #1. Thank you for watching.
Oh, and next week we'll be featuring Action Comics #1. So tune in next week.
That's a great comic. See you next week.